So I want to have kind of an in-depth discussion here. Now that The Rise of Skywalker is out and the sequel trilogy is complete, for better or for worse, I wanted to have a little bit of an in-depth discussion discussing one of the major things that went wrong with this trilogy and what hopefully Disney and other studios can learn from this. Because yeah, unfortunately the sequel trilogy, which we all dreamed about as kids, is a wash, if you ask me. Whether or not you like The Last Jedi or hate it, or The Rise of Skywalker, how you feel about that, they're very disjointed, and that's part of the conversation we're going to have right here. You know, months ago I said that this trilogy was not going to be remembered fondly because of the differences in creative, and that's kind of what discussion's about. So J.J. Abrams comes in, he directs Force Awakens. Rian Johnson then comes in to direct The Last Jedi. Colin Trevorrow was supposed to direct, the Rise of, Episode 9. I don't know if it was called that. But based on what Rian Johnson did with the characters in The Last Jedi, Colin Trevorrow didn't have anything. That's been the rumor. Now, I can't confirm that, but the story is that Colin Trevorrow just did not have the right vision or the right idea to pick up where Rian Johnson left off, but J.J. Abrams did. And his whole kind of fix for all this was, a lot of retcons. I mean, that's what he did. Not just retconning Last Jedi, but the entire saga as a whole. Now, when you look at the two filmmakers, Rian Johnson's history versus J.J. Abrams is very interesting. Rian Johnson's always been more of a creative guy. He's always made films that I feel he thinks are kind of artistic, independent movies, which I was worried about when he first got hired for Last Jedi for Episode 8, because I remember thinking, okay, Star Wars has a lot of equity with fans. It's been around for many, 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 many years. And it's a franchise that is gigantic. One of the biggest franchises in the history of civilization, right? And for you to come in, there's an awful lot of pressure on all these guys. We have to give them that. Lots of pressure to deliver a good movie. And what J.J. Abrams kind of tried to do was, placate to the fans and give them what they want. So the fans did not like the prequels. So what did they do? The Force Awakens tried to be like the original trilogy. They tried to bring everybody back to warm memories of the original three movies, which is why the movies come off having elements of the original three, including A New Hope, which is what Force Awakens kind of copied. Then Rian Johnson comes in after hearing that, The Force Awakens was a little too derivative of A New Hope. Let's do something a little bit different. And what Rian Johnson wanted to do was deconstruct the character of Luke Skywalker. He wanted to take Luke in a different direction, take Kylo Ren in a different direction, and sort of see what he could do with these characters and kind of play with them, to be honest, sort of like toys. Like, you could imagine him making this movie when he was a kid, playing with the actual toys. Obviously, there was no Snoke toy, but you get the drift. And a lot of people liked what Rian Johnson did in that movie. Let's be real. A lot of people, not even critics or blue check marks, liked it. A lot of people did not like it, myself included, because I feel like with Rian Johnson, when it comes to writing his own characters, he can do a pretty good job. I mean, just look at Knives Out, for example. However, to play devil's advocate with myself, if you look at The Last Jedi, the three new characters in that movie, DJ, Rose Tico, and Holdo, to me are boring, pointless characters. So even Rian Johnson is far from perfect. Knives Out was like a great movie. I mean, that was a great movie, and I think that really placated to his strengths and weaknesses. I'm sorry, his strengths mostly. But when it comes to Star Wars, you just have to be very careful, because you're not only are you doing a part of a trilogy, and you have to be cognizant of that the next director, whether it would have been Colin, JJ, or whoever else, has to follow up with you. So when you make your movie, you have to make sure that you don't conclude too many plot threads, and you give the next director something to work with. And Rian Johnson did not give Abrams much to work with. And their visions were very, very different. Like I said, Abrams had an idea in his head. You have, Rey, you have Snoke, you have Kylo Ren, you have these new characters. He had this idea, tell a story, and Rian Johnson just pretty much cut it off. It's what it comes off like, ladies and gentlemen, is it kind of feels like when you're playing hot potato with a story, or when I was a kid, we would, as a class, come up with a story, and everybody has to pass over a paper to write like a sentence or, dialogue or something. And so what you have is you have a classroom filled with, 30 kids, and they all have 30 different ideas about where to take a character. And so there's no actual vision. And the problem is that Kathleen Kennedy was not, and she was not focused enough she was not in the trenches, and she didn't come up with the story that could have been told. She didn't come up with. She wasn't the leader that like a Kevin Feige was, because Kevin Feige's worked with several different directors, and even though they're all different movies, they all sort of fit the narrative of the Infinity Saga or whatever phase you're talking about. Here, Kathy Kennedy gave the directors almost complete creative control with a couple of plot threads. Obviously, Rian Johnson could not. There's a couple caveats here. Rian Johnson, when he was writing Last Jedi, he could not kill off Kylo Ren or Rey because they were going to be important characters into the third film, and he had to do what he could to tell this story. And what he chose to do, like I said, was he chose to deconstruct Luke Skywalker, and in my opinion, he did it in a very poor way. I feel like he made Luke into a coward that contradicted who Luke Skywalker was in the previous trilogy. It's just not the same Luke Skywalker, a man of integrity. And when you have integrity, you don't really lose your integrity when you get older, especially when you're a space wizard. So the whole thing was just a complete big mistake. And then we have Rise of Skywalker, where what J.J. Abrams chose to do was, instead of pick up where Rian Johnson left off and try to craft the story based on what's left, he decided to throw in more stuff and to kind of go backwards before going forwards. So the first half of The Rise of Skywalker is sort of like his episode 8. You could actually, I wouldn't be surprised if someday this happens where the fandom takes episode 8, Rian Johnson, cuts out like the Canto Bight stuff and shortens the movie, and then adds some of the material from episode 9 in there. Because it just, there's a time skip of 1 year, but that time skip, a lot of stuff happens in that 1 year, including the big event of Palpatine returning. And so, the original plan was not to have Palpatine in there at all, and Abrams just didn't want to resurrect Snoke for whatever reason, so he decided to resurrect Palpatine. My guess is because he wanted it to be more fan servicey, bringing back a classic original trilogy character, but he also wanted to tell this story of the Sith and their grand plan, so to speak, to continue the Sith legacy, going forward. That was all part of Rise of Skywalker. But basically what he did was he essentially gave Rian Johnson the middle finger, like Rian Johnson gave him the middle finger. And it really felt like, and David Stewart said this first, this trilogy feels like a custody battle between a husband and a wife, right? Between a couple. It doesn't have to be a husband. It could be two wives, two husbands, whatever, whatever gender they are. It's like a custody battle between two people. And the characters in the movie are the voices for these people. So, when Rian Johnson writes Luke Skywalker to say, forget the past, it's like or not Luke Skywalker, it's like Kylo Ren, and Luke. He's kind of crapping on Force Awakens, which is so focused on the past. And then when Rise of Skywalker comes around and he brings up things from the past, you have like holocron stuff, you have Rey's true identity being revealed. It's like he's crapping on Rian Johnson. So you've got a couple who are having a custody battle over Star Wars. That's crazy to me. And that kind of stuff never happens. Like, you never hear about that stuff happening with the MCU. You never hear about that. And it's totally because of the lack of leadership from Kathleen Kennedy. It should be her job to make sure this gets straightened up and the story is good. And some people love Last Jedi. Like I said, I'm not even going to blame you for that. You have your right to your opinion. I don't like the fact that Rian Johnson screwed around with stuff that he shouldn't have screwed around with. That's my opinion. Or that he did not take into account that he was writing chapter 2 of a 3-chapter story and really didn't leave much for chapter 3. It was like a self-contained movie in many ways when you really think about it. Abrams had to come in and make a very sporadic, a very jarring, Jar Jar Abrams. He had to make a very jarring movie with a lot of content and a lot of story. And to me, it just felt like, there was no synergy. And we have to be cognizant of this for the future. Like, if you're, obviously, I don't think Hollywood cares about my opinion, but I feel like if you're a studio, or maybe you're a young person and one day you're going to grow up and actually run these things, because some of you guys have big dreams and I hope you achieve them. Be cognizant of this. Make sure that there is a throughput, there is a synergy, and there is at least a general outline of the story you want to take, because if not, you're going to have 3 movies. One, was a fun movie that kind of went too far with the nostalgia. The second one, it crapped on the first one, and the third one crapped on the second one. It's such an unusual thing. We've never had this happen before in the history of cinema, and Star Wars is the franchise that had to suffer. And I don't care what they say. I'm sure it's not personal between Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams, but they have completely different visions on what filmmaking is and what Star Wars is. And some would say that Rian Johnson's more talented. And honestly, I'm not sure if Abrams ever made a movie as good as Knives Out. I don't think Mission Impossible 3, which is my favorite movie he's ever done, is as good as Knives Out. So in some ways, Rian Johnson got him as far as making a good movie goes. JJ, Super 8, he makes fun little movies that are kind of nostalgic, but he's not Rian Johnson. Either the whole trilogy would have been Rian Johnson's baby or J.J. Abrams, or honestly, neither one, because they both have their flaws. And even though I think they are both Star Wars fans, I really do think that, especially Abrams, I feel like they were trying to be ambitious while also trying to play it safe. And one person was more ambitious than the other, and then the other one had to come in and clean up their mess. So it was just, this is a bizarre situation, folks. Let me know in the comments what you think. But, Rian Johnson always wants to kind of challenge the norm. He wants to shake things up. He wants to challenge the perception. He's very much a nihilist. He's very, what's the word? Like I said, very nihilistic, whereas Abrams just wants to make people happy. But the problem is he's not very good at executing. You know what I mean? And that's their biggest issues with those two guys. They just should not work together because they can't. So let me know what you think, and we'll talk soon.